In our business, we will talk to some sellers who are interested in selling, but they aren't quite sure how selling to an investor works or whether or not they want to sell to an investor. And there might not be significant motivation or pain. And I'm going to tell you exactly how I talk to this type of prospect to get them to make a decision, because at the end of the day, that is what we're after. Who am I? My name is Ryan Rice. I am a full time real estate investor, and I share all of this stuff so that you can make more money in your real estate business. Our primary goal when we're talking to sellers is to simply get them to make a decision. And this might be contrary to what a lot of wholesalers or what a lot of direct to seller marketing real estate businesses and how they operate. But at the end of the day, that's our goal, to get them to make a decision. Our goal is not to get them to sell their house to us or not to get them to choose our company to service whatever their needs are. We need to get them to make a decision. And the way that we do that is by giving them information that they may need that is going to help them in their decision. And I have found this to be a very positive experience in terms of how prospects are interacted with. And it's very contrary to how a lot of other direct to seller real estate businesses operate. So if you can operate in a fashion where you're trying to gather enough information so that the seller can operate in a fashion that's in their best interest, just doing that alone is going to set yourself apart from most other direct to seller real estate businesses out there. And so that's just something that's worked for me. And I found that it helps build trust a little bit more easily and a little bit more quickly, because it's not hard for sellers to pick up whether or not what you're telling them is in your best interest or in their best interest. This is just a mode of operation that has really served me and ultimately has helped serve my clients. And first, what's really important is when we talk to a seller, we have to clarify why we're talking to them in the first place, right? And unless they are one type of seller that you are cold calling and it's the first time that you've talked to them, if there's any other scenario, any other lead source that you're talking to a seller and you have them on the phone, you have the upper hand because they're there and it means that they have some sort of problem that they need your help solving. And so it's important to clarify why they're there. And the way that I do this in my sales script is I just ask in a very upper inflection. I ask in a genuinely curious way, Mr. Seller, I'm curious, what has you interested in selling? Right. And it comes across in a certain tonality that is genuinely curious and I'm asking to try to help them. And that's important because if I ask them in a, what has you interested in selling? Right. That is not coming off in a tonality that is there to help them. And so it's really important to nail that tonality. And if there's not a clear problem that they articulate back to me, or there is not significant pain and they are not of an avatar who it makes sense for us to help, for those of you that are in direct to seller real estate, a lot of sellers that we help have some sort of significant pain that they're going through because those are the problems that our businesses can solve for them. If there isn't significant pain, then I have found it beneficial to go a little bit further and help educate them on the difference between selling to us and selling through a traditional route with a realtor, because most of them don't know. And that's why they're there talking to you to begin with. And so if after asking, hey, what has you interested in selling, they don't give me some sort of significant pain, I'll always just do a quick follow up to kind of gauge the temperature of where they're at. Hey, have you considered working with a realtor? And the responses here are always different. Some have considered it, some haven't considered it. Some, maybe they saw your marketing channel and you're the first person that they've talked to. Either way, asking that question helps establish what they've tried so far or what thoughts have they given about their process of selling so far, because that's going to give you the information that you need to determine which route is going to be best for them to sell their house. And depending on what they say to that, if they say, well, no, I haven't considered it, then that is a great opportunity to jump in and educate them. If they say, well, yeah, I have considered it, but I don't really want to pay the fees, or a lot of sellers you'll talk to, and they'll want retail price, but they want a convenient process. And sometimes we just have to educate them that maybe that might not be possible. But this specific talk track I have found is a very succinct way of communicating the difference between selling to an investor like us or selling through a traditional realtor. And here's what I'll say to them. I'll say, yeah, Mr. Seller, what I've found is that there are three important buckets in the process of selling a home. There is the price bucket, which is self explanatory. There is the convenience bucket, which is, I would define as how much effort and sweat equity and sacrifice do you want to put into the process of selling your home in order to get a better price. And then there's the speed/certainty bucket, which, how quickly would you like this to happen? And how much certainty would you like there to be in the process? And I'm to help clarify what I mean by certainty, I might say something like, for example, if I buy your house cash, you know exactly what I can pay for it, you know exactly when I can close, and you know exactly what the terms are. There is a significant amount of certainty in that route. So that's just an example of what I mean by certainty. And then I'll ask something like, was that helpful? And they'll give me some sort of response that'll indicate how they feel about what I just told them. And then I'll typically just ask them, hey, out of those three, which are most important to you? In other words, could you rank them? And that response is going to give you a really good idea of what's important to that seller. Some sellers will say, oh, well, price is the most important thing for sure. And when a seller tells me that, I might say, well, I know I asked if you consider working with a realtor, but that is likely the scenario where you're going to be able to put the most amount of money in your pocket. Is that a scenario that you want to explore? And if we go through that and there's still no clear pain, or they don't articulate that, oh, yes, I would like that route, or, oh, yes, I really like the convenience and the speed certainty, that's more important to me than price, then I might just ask them, would it be helpful if I walked you through what the difference between selling to an investor like myself is and selling through a traditional route like a realtor? And I ask that because some of them already know, or at least they think that they know. But some of them are like, yeah, actually, that would be really helpful. And so then, boom, getting their permission or getting them to ask me, hey, yeah, could you walk me through that difference, is helpful, because it's not me explaining to them like, hey, you big idiot, here's the difference between selling to an investor like me and selling through a realtor, right? It's not coming across like I'm giving them information that they haven't asked for. If I ask, would that be helpful, and they answer yes, then I'm progressing the conversation in a direction that they have asked for. And I found that to be kind of an important step, because if you just give them a bunch of information without them asking for it, you don't even know if you're actually solving a problem that they have. So I found it's really important as we're navigating these conversations with sellers, especially if they're a little bit more undecided, that we ask good questions and have them tell us which direction they want the conversation to go. And so when I ask them, and if they tell me yes, that would be really helpful if you explain to me the difference. What I'll say is, well, look, the pros, and let's go over the pros and cons of selling through a realtor first. The pros, that's likely going to be the route that's going to put the most amount of money in your pocket. The cons, it's going to be the route that has the least amount of convenience and the least amount of speed/certainty. Least amount of convenience in terms of you're going to have an inspection period. And I might say something like, do you know what that is? And if they say no, I'll explain it to them. Then I'll explain what an appraisal contingency is. Then I'll explain what a financing contingency is. And then I'll explain how a buyer is probably going to ask for stuff to be fixed and do a full on home inspection. And I'll just share with them how convenience is typically not a aspect of selling a traditional route with a realtor, right? Because when you go with a realtor, what most realtors will do is they'll walk a seller through the house, say, "Hey, I suggest you to fix this, this, and this. That's going to help us get X price," and then they'll have to go, hire contractors to do those things, and they'll list it, and that's how they get the best price. Some people want nothing to do with that process. And those that are interested in doing that process, again, you can guide them towards, hey, I got a great realtor. It's likely that you guys probably work with great realtors, and just giving them a great resource could be something that is going to work out and build you some value surplus, right? By just giving them information and giving them a good resource, you are providing them more value than what they're not paying for that, right? But you're just giving them good information, and that is going to put you in surplus in terms of the value in that exchange. And they're going to remember that going forward. If you like what you're hearing, share this with another investor or someone else in the real estate industry. Together, I think we can make the real estate industry better for the sellers out there. And share it on your Instagram. Tag me. I will respond to as many as I possibly can. And I think that's, again, how we can make this industry better. Thank you. And then I'll explain, in terms of speed certainty, the normal time frame, if a buyer is buying conventional, is minimum 30 days. Sometimes it could be up to 45. I've had conventional closings drag out to 60 days. And then if we start to get into an FHA or a VA or some other type of loan product, then it could be an even longer time frame. So not as much speed. And that's the most amount of uncertainty, right? Because depending on how good the realtor is, the amount of certainty is going to be variable depending on how good and how much experience that realtor has. But at the end of the day, the realtor is going to put it on the market, and nobody has a crystal ball, right? There's a lot less certainty putting it on the market than if you have an offer cash on the table. They know exactly what they're getting. They know the terms, they know the price, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'll explain that. And then I'll explain the pros and cons of selling to an investor like ourselves. And I'll say, look, the pros of selling to an investor like myself is it's going to be the most convenient home selling process that you've ever been through. And what I mean by that is once I get your autograph, you can be completely done with the process until you have to sign the deed, right? There's nothing else that you can do. You can leave everything behind. You don't have to fix anything. I'm not going to ask you to fix anything. You don't even have to cut the grass again if you don't want. You don't have to clean it. And I will emphasize that point if they communicated to me that that is something that they desire. And then I'll say another pro of selling to an investor like myself, I can get this done. My average closing time frame is 21 to 30 days. That's usually what I tell them. And I'll tell them if you want something done sooner, I've closed as quickly as 7 to 10 days before. But what is most conducive if you sell your house to me cash, even if you don't want speed, is I can be flexible for you. And so let's say, for example, that they had communicated to me earlier in the conversation that they're selling their house and they want to move directly into their next place, but there's uncertainty around where they'll go or when they'll go there, but they want the process of selling to be figured out, right? That's a perfect value proposition for us because we can give them certainty around being flexible with their closing timeline and the time that they need, and not have to deal with trying to put it on the market and then having a buyer come in and saying that they want the house, but they're not going to give post-close occupancy. And then they got to go find somewhere to live in between. And that selling point alone is what recently locked up for me more than a $50,000 deal, just because the seller wanted certainty around that. So explaining the pros of selling to an investor, and if they have communicated to you a need around speed and certainty, articulating that can be very beneficial for them to understand. And then I'll just be honest with them and I'll say, hey, look, the cons of selling to an investor cash like myself, is it's not going to put as much money in your pocket as selling the traditional way with a realtor. And so, what's more important to you? The convenience and the speed that I just went through, or putting the most money in your pocket? And they'll communicate back to me what it is that they want. And then I can guide them based on what they communicate. And what's so important about this is you don't want to find yourself trying to convince a seller that they should choose you, or they should choose the route that you can help serve, right? You want to get all of the information that you can, and the problems that they're articulating for you are problems that you can solve, because then you're doing what's in their best interest. And so, again, I can't emphasize enough, and I love the phrase, we need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. But your job is not to get them to sell their house to you. Your job is to get them to clearly articulate their problems, and you give them the information so that they can make a decision. Your job is to get them to make a decision. And that's such an important concept in this process. And so once I've gone through the pros and cons of each, and they articulate back to me what it is that they want, then I'll confirm or I'll label it. And so what I mean by label, it's a Chris Voss technique. By the way, look up Chris Voss. He's got a great book, Never Split the Difference, out there. And he also has a masterclass. It's really good. I've been through most of it. But what I mean by labels, I will just repeat back to them what they've told me in terms of what it is that they want of the process of selling their home. And then they will give me feedback based on what I repeat back to them is their problem. They'll confirm what I'm saying is accurate. Or if there are holes in what it is that I'm saying, then they will correct those holes. And then based on the feedback that they give me on that label, I will then guide them in a direction. And I will say, hey, based on what you're telling me, here is the direction I think would be most helpful for you. What do you think? And then we'll move in that direction. And I want to tell a quick story of a recent deal that I closed where I didn't make a ton of money. I made a quick 15 grand. It was a deal that I wholesaled. And I had an older gentleman who had a great property in a great part of the city. And he really didn't need to do much work to the property. It was vacant. A tenant had just moved out. To get top dollar, he probably needed to do stuff like paint and clean, maybe change a couple light fixtures. And he just had zero interest in doing that. He was actually an ex-painter himself, but was a little bit older, didn't like the idea of having to bring a ladder into the house. There were some very high ceilings, and he just didn't want to go through that. But he had this bottom line. He said, hey, price is definitely pretty important to me. And throughout the conversation, the more that I understood what it was that he wanted, I said, you know what, Mr. Seller, I just don't know if I can pay you what it is that you want. I think you should just list it with a realtor, right? I wanted to guide him based on what he was telling me in a fashion that I thought would help him most. And the feedback that he gave me later on, after we closed the deal, I did an exit interview with him. And he said, one reason why I went with you is because you articulated to me a direction that was truly in my best interest. You basically told me like, hey, I don't know if you should sell me the house cash because it's a great house and you would have to give up some equity. He was like, when you told me that, it just helped me have faith that I could trust that what you were saying was accurate, because I knew you weren't trying to give me information that would get me to sell my house to you. You were just trying to help. And when I realized that you were just trying to help, it helped me realize that I was okay giving up some equity if you could hit this price that I had, and I could hit it. And he acknowledged he gave up some equity, and I made a quick 15 grand. And that was a win-win for everyone. And now he's got another house in the future that he's interested in talking with us about. And he's telling his friends because he had an experience where I didn't try to convince him to sell his house to me, but I tried to communicate what would be in his best interest based on what he communicated to me was important to him. And so I think that's such an important piece of direct to seller real estate is always acting, communicating, and being conscientious of what's in the best interest of the seller. And so that framework has really helped. The price, convenience, and speed. Those are the three buckets that have helped me communicate with clients and educate them on the difference between selling through a realtor and an investor. Going through the pros and cons has been really helpful because then I can really understand what it is that they want. And when they tell me what they want, I can say, hey, based on what you've told me, this is the route I think you should go. So hope you guys enjoyed that. Hope you got some value out of that. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.